my mellow fellows, or should I say my rowdy reindeers. Y'all can be whichever reindeer y'all want to be. It's up to y'all. I think I want to be Comet or Vixen, whichever one, purely based off the names. Bob's Burgers has some of my favorite holiday episodes of all time, from their sweet Valentine's episodes to their spooky Halloween episodes, and of course to their iconic Thanksgiving episodes, which I'm so sad that we didn't get one 2 years in a row. And if it goes on to 3, I will be having a word with my friend Lemon Grab. What did Nene say? Don't make me call Portia, okay? Because I will if they skip Thanksgiving one more time. Bob's Burgers just knows how to write fun holiday themed episodes, so naturally that will also extend to their hilarious Christmas episodes. I love the Christmas episodes almost as much as I love the Thanksgiving episodes. The mannequin episode is hilarious to me. I love it. The blinkening episodes are beautiful and top tier entertainment. By the way, I did talk about the blinkening over on Alyssa's channel, so go check that out when you're done here. Anyway, the Christmas in the Car episode has quotes that I quote all the freaking time. And don't even get me started on a Gingerbread House episode. I love that episode. I watch that all the time. That is definitely one of my all-time favorites. I also love the last 2 more wholesome Christmas episodes we gotten in the past few seasons, especially the new one that just came out this year about them trying to save a cute little puppy. I love that one. It was really adorable. In my opinion, Bob's Burgers has never had a bad Christmas episode, but today I will only talk about one that tonally stands out among the rest as one of the most heartfelt Christmas episodes we have ever gotten from this show. And this episode has definitely started a trend into us getting more sentimental episodes of Bob's Burgers, and I really love that. Yes, today I am going to talk about The Plight Before Christmas and what this episode meant for Louise's character. So with that intro out of the way, you know the drill. Sit back, relax, grab a cup of hot cocoa as we talk about The Plight Before Christmas. The episode starts 9 days before Christmas. Gene is making a ton of noise while he is practicing for his xylophone concert he has later on that night. Gene was excited about performing Miss Merkin's first original musical production.
She says it's about love and loss and online shopping and the end of innocence. It's her greatest work.
I personally love that him and Miss Merkin are such good friends. We see this in the Itty Bitty Ditty Committee episode when Gene did his solo play and when they had a piano bar. Gene and Miss Merkins have pretty much been tight since around season 5-ish. Gene being besties with his music teacher is so on brand. Then again, Tina is friends with Mr. Bronca, so it's not that shocking. Anyways, Linda was in agony because she sadly had to miss Gene's performance because she had to go to Tina's Thunder Girls play. Bob is going to Gene's concert instead. They both plan on taping the performances and coming back and watching everything that night together as a family. The Thunder Girls are holding the play at a City Hall Plaza. Tina is doing a play as a literal star. Linda thinks that Tina is the star, even though Tina keeps correcting her saying no, she's just a star. But of course, Linda's going to hear what she wants to hear. They chose who was going to go to what event by flipping a coin. Linda was so torn up about not being able to go to one of her children's event, that poor woman almost threw up.
Cut me in half so I can go to both? Oh, God.
Oh, crap.
Oh, I'm gonna be sick.
It's under the fridge.
Help.
I got it.
This really shouldn't be a surprise. Linda and Bob have always made it a point to go to every one of their kids' performances. I mean, they even went to Gene's table setting competition. They like to be at every event their child is involved in, you know? Especially Linda. Anyways, Louise came in and Linda tried to ask which event she wanted to go to. However, it turns out that Louise also had an event planned for that night, a holiday poetry reading contest at the library. Bob and Linda accidentally got the day wrong. They thought it was meant for the next day. So now they have all 3 kids performing at the same night at the same time in completely different places.
Every year I enter a poem with the word poop in it so that if it gets selected, I get to say poop in the library.
That's not a great reason. Never mind.
Anyway, this year somehow I got in.
Bob and Linda both freak out obviously, but Louise calms everybody down and downplays the importance of this poetry contest. She says she just needs a ride and that she doesn't want them to stay anyway. Linda did not take this well at all. She practically melted on the floor.
Dear God, why? There's gotta be a way. What time does everyone's thing start?
6.
Ah!
Bob decides to just go with Louise's plan to drop off Louise at the library and for him and Linda to just attend Tina and Gene's performances like they originally planned. He just suggests for Louise to reenact the performance for them later at home. Louise was fine with this and the plan was set. Except for Linda, she was very much a mess.
Get a good angle!
Okay.
This is killing me!
While everybody else accepted what Louise said, Tina was very suspicious. Louise insisted that she submitted her jokey poem to the contest this year. Tina wants Louise to submit a real, meaningful poem that's important to her instead of a jokey type poem. Louise dismissed her and just said that she's not the feelings type of person. Louise clearly wanted to drop the subject, but Tina was not having it. Tina then remembered that Louise actually did write a serious poem this year and started to get a little bit suspicious of the situation. But before she can think about the situation any further, Louise shuts the conversation down just in time for Linda to pull up at the library. Linda walks Louise in and was definitely totally normal about it.
It's gonna be some hugging and I might cry, but we also have to hurry. Where's tissues? Forget it, I'll use my sleeve.
Meanwhile, Bob and Jean arrived at Jean's recital. Everyone seemed to be upset over something that was going on. This is where we meet Rachel Bisselbender, a new substitute teacher at Wagstaff. This was her first episode, but she did make a reappearance in the recent Doll episode. Anyways, Miss Merkin's sister Sheila appendix burst and she went into surgery. We met her sister Sheila in the piano bar episode, where they seem to have a very sweet but very antagonistic type of relationship. Even when her sister was in surgery, Miss Merkins was still going to come to this performance, but ironically, her appendix burst too, and now they're both in surgery. So Rachel was called in to sub because it was too late to cancel. However, the problem is she doesn't know anything about music, so this is going to be a bit of a challenge, especially since Miss Merkins has a very special system with directing the kids. The kids are bad at reading music notes, so she directs them manually in a very particular type of way. So yeah, they basically have no notes and no one knows how to direct the song. You can see how this is a problem. Meanwhile, Louise is at the poetry contest alone, waiting for the reading to start. She is noticeably nervous seeing how big the turnout is, but she kind of just brushes it off and tries to self-soothe. Moving to Tina, the Thunder Girls are getting ready to perform as well. Linda is helping run backstage and getting the girls into costume. The parts in the play were randomly assigned, by the way, but Linda still thinks Tina is the star of the play. Harley was a little jealous because she wanted to be the star, but she was the candle. This convinced Linda that everybody was gunning for Tina's role, which I found hilarious.
Watch your back. She's gunning for you. They all are.
Back to Jean, the sub is trying to find a way to make this work. The kids are all excited to perform, but didn't know what to do without Miss Merkins. Miss Merkins is a fan favorite teacher around Wagstaff, so the kids wanted to share her artistic musical vision and make her proud, which is very sweet of them. Bob was in the crowd talking with some other parents while they wait for the performance to start. Doug, Courtney's dad, asked where Linda was, and Bob explained the situation to him. And when he said he was missing one kid's performance, they all kind of had a reaction, which made Bob feel worse about it. Back at the Thunder Girls, Linda and the troop leader were still fitting the girls into their costumes. Tina was sitting back and thinking about her conversation with Louise in the car. She had a nagging feeling that something was off. Once she thought about it, she realized that Louise was definitely lying. She did submit a serious poem this year. Tina immediately tells Linda the reason Louise didn't say anything was because she was too embarrassed to admit this contest was important to her, so instead she kind of just downplayed it. She didn't want them to know that her feelings were hurt. Linda of course freaks out that Louise is all alone right now with no one to watch her perform. Linda called Bob right away and filled him in on the situation. Linda asked Bob to go because she was swamped as a stagehand and there was no way she could leave. So Bob had to try to go to both somehow on foot. He decided to pop in to see Louise and circle back to see the end of Jean's performance. Bob leaves and takes a cab to try to make Louise's performance as fast as possible. But the cab driver started to take him the wrong way, so it's going to take a minute for him to get to the right location. Now we're going back to Jean. His performance wasn't going too well, as you can imagine. Everybody was off, including the teacher. On the other hand, Tina nails the first part of her performance and her troupe is doing very well in comparison. When Tina was done, she urged her mom to go see Louise's performance instead, but Linda couldn't because she was swamped backstage. She told Tina Bob was going instead, but Tina was worried that Bob wouldn't make it because he didn't have the car. The cab driver was wandering around aimlessly and Bob had enough of it. He decided to get out and try to find a library on foot. Luckily, he recognized the area and thought he was nearby. With the help of a random stranger giving him a boost and a cute dog, Bob was at the library. Unfortunately, it was the wrong library. We check back in with Louise, and she's starting to feel insecure about reading her poem out loud to these strangers. She was worried that the crowd would hate her poem. She contemplates reading her joke poem instead of her sincere one, that way she wouldn't have to get all mushy in front of strangers. Bob is out of time and decides to run back to catch the end of Jean's play. He genuinely feels bad about it, but there's no way he would have been able to go to the right library in time to see her. He still did have time to go see Jean, so he opted for that. Bob and Linda both felt terrible, but this situation was definitely out of their control at this point. They felt like bad parents for not being there to support Louise, but it's hard to blame them given the very extreme circumstances they were put under. Going back to Jean, him and the kids are still performing pretty badly, so the sub decides to take a quick intermission.
You're terrible.
I've never heard angry applause before.
No, you're not terrible. We had a good start. Then 10 or 12 minutes of a kind of
Musical torture?
experimental torture.
The kids huddle backstage trying to figure out a way to save this performance. They knew they sucked, but they didn't want to finish the performance that way. Mr. Frann came in, of course, to offer trauma and disaster counseling to the kids after the performance. My first thought was to say how unhelpful this was, but as a person who's definitely had a bad performance before, due to circumstances completely outside of my control, an on-site counselor is not a bad idea. Just not for Mr. Frann. Anyways, just when everybody was about to give up, Jean has an idea. His idea was to limit the notes that they could play. That way it won't sound like a jumbled mess up there like it already does right now. Circling back to Tina, everything was still going strong. Tina is still trying to push Linda to go to Louise's performance, but Jenny literally begged Linda to stay and help. Jenny was overwhelmed as it is, so she would lose her mind without Linda helping her backstage. Linda was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place right now. Meanwhile, Bob thankfully makes it back in time to see Jean. Luckily, they were still in intermission when he came back, so he didn't miss much. Doug, as always, was super helpful.
I'm worried about you, Bob. Did you go around and see what life would have been like if you had never been born and someone punched you and threw you out of a bar and then you jumped in a river?
It was a little like that.
On stage, we could see Jean collecting keys from different xylophones to limit the noise they could make, while the teacher was doing a little bit of crowd work. When everybody got back on stage, they were ready to perform. This time though, the performance was actually going well. It didn't sound like trash this time. Applause, as Mr. Ambrose would say. And Bob was even recording like he said he would. We all know that he has trouble getting footage at school sometimes. Going back to Louise, finally it's time for Louise to read her poem. The guy running the show even says how much he loves her poem before he introduced her to the crowd. It's now or never, and Louise has to decide if she's going to read her sincere poem or not. Back at the play, Linda tells Tina that she's done a great job with her performance, but when she hugs the star, she didn't find her daughter. Instead, she finds out that Harley has taken Tina's place as a star and Tina has snuck off. Linda of course thought Harley went Tonya Harding on Tina for the role, but of course this was all Tina's idea in the first place.
What did you do? What did you do to Tina?
It was Tina's idea.
Also, that was a joke. Tanya, do not kneecap me, please. It's Christmas, have mercy. It was a joke, I swear. I mean, at your expense, but anyway, back to Louise. Louise was standing there unsure what to do, but when Louise looked up, she seen that Tina made it in time to come watch her read, and this gave Louise the confidence to read her real poem out loud.
I look up and I see my parents. I see and smell my brother. That's clearly where the gas is. And I see my sister with something that looks like gingerbread on her glasses. We made funny ornaments for the tree this year. I didn't expect to feel this way. I was focusing on Santa, but the best presents are sitting here, and they aren't even wrapped up.
Louise wrote a beautiful poem expressing her love for her family. She spends time talking about how grateful she is for them, and how the real presence is having them as a family, which is so sweet that it can make you cry. Thankfully, Linda also made it towards the end of her poem and got to listen to at least the last part of it. The amount of tears this episode has caused people should be a crime within itself. And with that, Jean's concert also finishes out strong. The sub makes me laugh because that's exactly how I would look trying to direct music. Anyways, after that beautiful performance, Tina teases Louise afterwards in the most sisterly way possible.
You love your family.
What are you girls talking about back there?
About how Louise loves her family.
Okay, she knows.
You love us.
At the end of the day, that poor sub only got $35 for all this mess. I feel bad for her. Then again, this is the American public school system, so there's no surprises here. But the good part is Gene has officially made another adult friend. Yay. Honestly, he might have more adult friends than he does actual regular friends. At the end of the episode, we see a lot of different scenes. We see Linda sharing the poem with Bob and telling him about both of their performances. We also see Gene visiting Miss Merkins in the hospital to tell her about the class performance and to show her the video, which was honestly so sweet. I love that. And lastly, we see the Belchers gather around the tree, sharing another great Christmas together. And with that, the Belchers have another great Christmas on the books. What a beautifully done episode. This episode shows how important it is to show up for your kids so that you can support them in their lives. When you're feeling a little anxious on stage, it helps to have a familiar face in the crowd to give you the confidence to do your best. Like Louise, your kids may not always ask for support, but it's kind of up to you to know them well enough to know when they need it. Louise is not a very emotionally expressive kid, so it's hard to read her sometimes, but this episode was one of those moments where she needed support but didn't want to ask for it. Thankfully, she had a sister who put her first and never stopped thinking about her once. Tina made sure she was going to be there for her, even if her parents couldn't be. This episode highlights both the vulnerability of Louise and also how seriously Tina takes her role as a big sister to Louise. When I think about this episode, I think about the growth Louise has had as a character. For the first 2 seasons, Louise was kind of a one-note character. While yes, she was definitely hilarious and gave us some iconic quotes and iconic scenes in the first couple seasons, she was also a bit callous and a little uncaring to her family. There are a lot of things Louise done in the first couple seasons that I do not see her doing now. Early season Louise didn't have as much of a conscience as much as she does right now. And I think her developing a sense of guilt, conscious, morals, and giving her something to stand for and giving her her own vulnerabilities and her own insecurities is definitely what made her character better now. I see a lot of people yell about how the early seasons were better or how they want to go back to when Bob's Burgers was edgier and less emotional. And some people even complain about the new sentimental episodes. But honestly, I don't want to go back to those early season days. First off, I'm convinced that the people who yell about the first couple of seasons being the best didn't really watch those seasons that much, and instead kind of just watched the viral clips that come out of the early seasons. If you actually sat and watched the first season in its entirety, not the fun clips that everybody loves to post, but if you actually watch the episodes, you see how some of the full episodes were kind of rough. And don't get me wrong, this is coming from someone who loves every season of Bob's Burgers, but definitely the first couple seasons were kind of weaker in comparison. And granted, yes, the first couple of seasons had hilarious moments, but the entire episodes sometimes needed work. I personally do like the first season, but usually it's one of the last seasons that I'd actually want to rewatch when I'm going through my rewatches. Like, it's never my first pick on a season to put on. Honestly, I like the second and the third season better than the first season. And honestly, season 4 is when they really found the Bob's Burgers formula we know today. And don't get me wrong, it's totally fine if you like some of the more off-coloredness of the early seasons, but to say seasons 1 and 2 were some of the best seasons and we have to go back to them is a straight up lie, especially when you recognize how different the Belcher family was in the early seasons. Their personalities were more extreme, and while they always loved each other from the very first season, they didn't have the same bonds they have now, especially Louise. Louise was written as a pure troublemaker in the early seasons. Louise was usually used as a one-liner character and didn't have much personality outside of creating chaos. She was kind of like a Bart Simpson, causing trouble, running schemes, and not having much emotions outside of that. She didn't care too much about her siblings or parents and was sometimes downright cruel to them. Like in later seasons, she definitely has more of a conscience than she did in the early seasons. Don't get me wrong, Louise is always funny no matter which era we're talking about, but I definitely do believe that if she would have stayed the exact same way she was in season 1, all the way up to what, season 15 we're on right now, then it would have gotten tiring eventually. The reason I compared her early season characterization to Bart was because eventually Bart's antics got old and people were tired of him being such a horrible brother. And if Louise would have stayed the exact same way she was in the early seasons like some people wanted her to, then I guarantee the fanbase would have eventually turned on her and start calling her a horrible sister. It always happens every single time with these type of chaotic characters. People like the slightly mean-spirited joking at first, but after a few seasons go by, people tend to get sick of it. It happened to Bart, it happened to Stewie, hell, it even happened to Homer and Peter. And a ton of characters like this who starts off as kind of like the jokester and then eventually spirals into being mean. It happens all the time, and then people get sick of it. And I truly believe that would have happened to Louise if she was never given the chance to grow and change as a character. We can definitely appreciate and love the unhinged season 1 and 2 Louise, while also acknowledging how, while it was good for the time, it probably would not have been good for her character in the long run. Also, the general change in tone for Bob's Burgers from purely chaotic comedy to a more empathetic family approach was definitely a good move for the TV show in the long run. A lot of people declare it as one of their cozy shows, and if it would have stayed the same way as it was in early seasons, I really don't think that would be the case. And because Bob's Burgers was brave enough to make this type of change, we now have shows like The Simpsons who followed their example and start steering their characters back to being more kinder and humane to each other and being an actual family. Louise's change was slow and gradual. It was a completely natural change over time. The first time the show ever acknowledged that Louise had family was actually in season 1 in the Spaghetti, Western, and Meatballs episode. In that episode, Louise felt jealous that Bob and Jean weren't spending time with her anymore, and that hurt her feelings. For most of season 1, she felt like an agent of chaos, but that episode was the first time her character actually felt human. It was only for one episode, but I do think it was the first attempt to humanize her a bit. The first time Louise stood up for her siblings was in the Bad Tina episode in season 2, where she and Jean got back at Tammy for blackmailing Tina. Also, brown hair Tammy jump scare, I know. Season 3 was the first time they fully dove into this vulnerable side of her. In an Earsy Rider episode, she got her ear stolen and was helpless for the majority of the episode while Logan continued to bully her, which is the first time in the show we've ever seen Louise in such a vulnerable, powerless position like this. I think season 3 was the season that they rolled back on her evilness a bit and actually characterized her as a 9-year-old girl. Then we start getting more episodes like the Full Bars episode where she was bullied by teens, the mother-daughter laser razor episode where she had issues connecting with Linda as a daughter, and the Boys for Now episode where Louise developed her first crush. All of that was in one season. And from season 3 and beyond, Louise has kind of stayed this way. Chaotic, but still also empathetic. She developed a personality beyond being funny. She cares for her siblings, she has friends, she has hobbies, she has morals, and finally she feels like a full character and not just an archetype. I like how Louise is a bit of a nerdy tomboy. I like that she has complicated relationships and insecurities. Early season Louise didn't feel things like guilt, overprotectiveness of her siblings, or self-doubt. We wouldn't have episodes like Amelia, Boys for Now, Slumber Party, The Kids Run Away, The Haunting, Glued Where's My Bob, Louise, Poops I Didn't Do It Again, Bridged Over Trouble Rudy, Manny Picks It Crap Show, Touch of Evaluations, What About Jobs, The Amazing Rudy, Fraud of the Dead, From Whom the Doll's Toes, and especially A Plight Before Christmas. None of these awesome episodes would exist without her personality evolution. And that's not even half of the episodes that Louise's more caring personality is directly explored. Louise's evolution is something I'm tired of seeing people complain about. This change has brought us some of the most memorable moments in Bob's Burgers. I think it's very refreshing having a fun character like Louise still be capable of kindness. And yes, it is perfectly fine to miss how chaotic and crazy she was early on, but I wouldn't trade that for the moments we get right now. The Plight Before Christmas felt like a reward to its viewers. This episode not only demonstrates the tight bond between the Belcher sisters, but it also shows us Louise's more vulnerable side. We don't see this side of her often, but when we do, it hits harder because it's coming from a character like Louise. In this episode, Louise's feelings are hurt, but she still tries to protect her family from feeling any more guilt than they already felt. Louise has always been a bit embarrassed by sentimentality, so of course she didn't want to admit to wanting support from her family. I also love how happy she was when her sister came to emotionally support her. You can tell she was a little embarrassed reading such sappy stuff out loud, but that doesn't make the poem any less sweet. Louise's poem is beautiful and shows just how much she loves her family. She may be tough and a bit of a brat sometimes, but she genuinely cares. And in the end, she got to share her feelings with the ones she loved the most. As Tina says, she loves her family. This episode would not be possible without the kindness they instilled in her character along the way. If this episode would have followed season 1 or 2 Louise, it would have felt unnatural, but because they took their time to build this, it felt right. A Plight Before Christmas was truly one of those special episodes that's hard to forget. Lately, Bob's Burgers has been giving us these beautiful episodes that really touch your heart. Episodes like this is what makes Bob's Burgers stand out among the rest. This show is a trailblazer that has carved its own space in the genre. Instead of just doing what other shows were doing, they did their own thing. I admire this episode because it's a great example of what it looks like to properly develop a character over time. This episode was built from the groundwork they've laid in the seasons before it. This episode doesn't feel out of character because they've done so much work to build Louise to this point. With every season, Louise cares more, forgives more, and most importantly, loves more. Now that doesn't mean that she's not the same Louise. Our girl is still causing trouble, coming up with schemes, and rebelling against adults. But it's nice to take a break from that sometimes and remind us that she may be a rebel, but she's still just a little kid at the end of the day. A kid who's still finding her identity and exploring what it means to be human. And this episode truly shows where her heart is. So, here's to Louise, the spunkiest yet sweetest girl you've ever seen. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys are having a nice holiday, whether you're with family, friends, or chilling on your own. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Happy holidays to you and your kin. Bye!